Hello everyone, this is update for February 6th, 2023, day 348 of the war, end of the date update. Before we're gonna jump into Ukraine, um, I just want to say something that I think um, was on my mind when I saw those balloons from China over the US. So this is what came to my mind is Matthias Rust, how he came to the Soviet Union in 1987. And again, it's not about Maria's roost and it's not about Chinese balloon. It's in both cases about Soviet system that actually was not capable to intercept him. And I would say similar reaction that was happening in the U.S. When I believe actually two more balloons were actually flew over undetected. So there is a lot of parallels with this, and I leave it up to you to how you want to think about that. Now let's move to sort of regular topics, and first we're gonna look at Russia, where things are going pretty bad financially, from bad to worse. Let's put it this way, and economically, financially, you can say that way. So because of this, because of the sanctions, because the first of all, because of the export of natural gas is essentially dead or extremely small for Russia right now. The prices went down to I think close to $600 per thousand cubic meters. Basically the income is not there, and so the only sort of viable resource left is crude oil. That's what sort of Russia essentially lives off right now. The export of agriculture is blocked essentially for the most part. Russia had actually bumper crop in 2022 despite sort of all expectations because the lack of seeds and all of that. But I guess the seeds were used from a pre-war year, so it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in 2023 when supplies of seeds probably will start to dry up. But anyways, Russia had I think one of the largest uh, agriculture sort of harvest in recorded history. So they have tons of grains in elevators, and there is a problem with storage capacity. There's simply not storage capacity. So what happens is remains to be seen. But let's put this way: Russian agriculture managed to survive 2022 without too much damage. But 2023 is going to be similar to what happened to Ukrainian agriculture in 2022. So again, this is the same idea: is both countries going to get hit? Is just Ukraine is smaller by let's say 3.54 times than Russia, so the hit is felt much more quicker than in Russia. Russia will get hit, will feel the pain. It's just much more delayed because and there is a huge buffer of resources that allows to continue what Russian government continues this war, uh, despite all of the sort of attempts to cut it off. By the way, there is going to be 200% import duty on Russian aluminium to the U.S. and the sort of funny, not funny, but say actually, if you really think, it's actually very depressive and actually very say I don't know how to you will pick the word whatever you want to say it, but essentially U.S. first want to basically ban import of aluminium out of Russia, but then they realized okay that's going to lead to high inflation in the world, even higher than it is right now. There's going to be more problems, so the solution was but you need the optics of like we're doing something. So the optics is okay, we're going to ban importation of aluminium into the US, but not elsewhere. And so it just really means it's going to go, let's say, to China or any other countries where it can be used because it's the same idea. It's one global market for aluminum, right? This is not some kind of like country to country. It's one, think about this like as a uh, one pond or whatever you call it, one bucket of water. And if you pull water from it in general, then water goes down for everyone more or less. And basically, this means is if water goes down, the prices go up. A very simple, primitive explanation that pretty much will always help you to understand what's going to happen. So this is what's happening to aluminium, as I said. So in order not to disrupt prices on the world market, not to increase them, because inflation is already creating huge problem everywhere in the Western world, right? So this was, I guess, unexpected um, by the by the leadership in the West, that this war will produce, that this war will happen and will produce such inflationary effect. Um, and the reason for that, because after fall of the Soviet Union, it had tremendous, uh, stockpile inventory of all sorts of natural resources that were never exported to the world market because they were all used for military production, for preparation to the next World War III, basically. So they were all freed up um, after the fall of Soviet Union in 1991, and they flooded the world market, and they were continuously pumped over this past 31 years, essentially helping to bring down prices in the world, and actually helping to create, I wouldn't say it's prosperity, but because it didn't touch everyone, but still improvement in the living standards for many people. I cannot say it's for everyone, but it definitely improved life of many people. I mean, you probably can look at yourself, and you will just, if you compare how it was in, let's say, 93, 92, and let's say in 2019, then you compare, I'm sure you will find improvement in your life. So so that's how what was happening. Now all of those resources are being basically pulled back, or supply of those resources being extremely limited to the world market. And so you're essentially getting back to like 1991, not completely, but close to it. And the closer you get to 1991, the more difficult it becomes in the West to maintain standard of living, because simply you don't have resources for that standard of living, and that's why issuing unbacked credit the way it used to be over this, let's say, past 30 years is not going to work. And realization of that hasn't sunk in the heads of many in the leadership, in the financial leadership in the West. And I think as it will as the realization of that comes true, the things will change quite a bit. But the point is, there's not enough resources to continue the same quality of life for everyone. And the way it's being dealt is by the increasing interest rates. As you can see, your ECB increased interest rates, um, Federal Reserve, which is the leader out of all of the central banks, then Bank of England, then I think Bank of Japan. So all major, Western banks, let's call it this way. Uh, and this is not being done to just like, oh, we're just fighting inflation. It's really to address this fundamental problem that, as I said, is the lack of resources. And the way you address it is you increase rates, so uh, many people will have less of those because they cannot borrow anymore um, to consume. And that's very simple. So it's very simple sort of strategy um, that's happening in the West. At the same time, there's a clear shortage of labor in the West. Well, I'd say more so even in the U.S. That's being puzzled, and the reason there is a shortage is because most of those jobs, they're not paying living wages. So essentially, you're gonna take that job and you cannot live on that money. So basically, those jobs are essentially useless or trash or fake job. I mean, not fake, but nobody will sort of do economic suicide to themselves. So people don't take those jobs essentially. And I'm not even discussing the problems in the educational system. That's another layer of the problems. But even just from that plain perspective, that's what's really happening. So hopefully this kind of explains the whole economic sort of problem and why you see this reaction from the US. Let's just um, kind of like ban Russian aluminum from the US, but it's going to be everywhere in the world. And so everything is going to be, looks like optically we're doing something, but in reality, we're not doing anything. And the same is happening, by the way, with the Russian crude. So now Russian crude is all going to India, then where it's being processed, and once it's processed, it's not considered anymore Russian, of Russian origin, and then it actually being exported to the east coast of the U.S. from India. So, and the exports from India are just going up tremendously. Also, export of Russian crude oil, where seaborne transport or ships are also up over, I think, past week. So basically, this whole trade is booming. So you don't need to worry about shortages of gasoline and diesel fuel. They will come as a result of the energy policies in the West, not as a result of not having oil from Russia. That's for sure. So that's what's going on sort of economically, and then in terms of Russian financial situation. So there is information in Russia that they have, and this is going to be, I didn't have time, honestly, even desire to translate these numbers into, let's say, US dollars. They're all in Russian rubles, but just to give you understanding how much more financial sort of powder Russia has to continue the war. So at this point, Russian government is actively selling its FX reserves because it doesn't have enough. The income is much lower than expected. The expenses are up because you have all of this expensive army, and the war is generally extremely expensive undertaking. So you have huge expenses. And so they selling about 9 billion worth of Russian rubles per day to sustain whatever they are spending. The Russia the Russian government estimates that they have 6 trillion of those reserves that they can spend. So in other words, I think roughly how many, like, let's call it at 1 trillion for 100 days, how much they spend. They cannot obviously spend all of it. You never can get to the bottom of it. So let's say half of it is going to be 300 days. So so Russia still has some basically financial firepower for another at least 300 days of this war, which can break into 2-year war, which is pretty impressive given how much people resources being used. And usually, and as I said, war is extremely expensive thing, and it consumes resources extremely quickly. It's like a black hole of resources, people, of everything. So while situation in Russia gets pretty bad, and it's still not sort of bad enough financially, economically, for the average Russian citizen to feel it, to feel pain directly. Or there is some mild pain, but it's sort of, I would say, offset by propaganda. Oh, we having come back here in Ukraine, specifically around Bakhmut, Soledar. We are successful now. We're gonna push all of these Ukrainians and recapture everything and all of that stuff. So there's still a little bit left of that, but it's definitely Russian propaganda gets towards the end of it. There is not much of sort of this propaganda juice left in the Russian society. Let's put it this way. But at the same time, it's an extremely obedient society. So it doesn't mean that things will start to pop up or anything like that. This may continue for a while. Anyways, oh, and then another topic that I wanted to discuss is there is a lot of this again propaganda lies from Russian side that there are. I think that Ukrainian side lost like 150,000 soldiers dead or something like that. Some insane numbers. So that's obviously not true. If that's the case, there would be, as I said, 1917 moment in Ukraine a long time ago. So Ukraine lost probably between 50 to 60 thousand soldiers or military personnel dead, and probably closer to 60. In Russia, in the same, they basically go neck to neck. Overall, their loss is pretty much the same. Maybe one is ahead by a couple thousand, one is behind by a couple thousand, but directionally, this is where it all is. Where Ukraine is sort of losing is a significantly larger number of prisoners of war that Russians have, of Ukrainians. It's definitely pushing close to 10,000, maybe more, but there's also this exchanges happening, so it's kind of like to extend hard to keep track of all of that, but it's essentially somewhere, let's say 10,000 at this point versus probably 15 to 2,000, somewhere in that ballpark. So this is where sort of Ukraine is definitely quite behind Russian side. And then if you look at those who are wounded, and then within the wounded you have the ones that are sort of heavily wounded. Some of them will die, hopefully small percentage. Some of them will not be capable to live life normal way anymore. So that's another between those two categories. It's another give you like 30,000, maybe up to 40. So basically, the total losses for both sides push for society, I would say, because if you're still alive but have a wound, let's say you don't have leg or arm or something like that, you're still alive. You cannot be sort of terribly productive person in society at large. Some people will, but many will not. And at least you're still alive for the family and so on. But but from a societal perspective, it's clearly lost. So from that perspective, that's about pushing towards 100,000 from both sides, which is a large number, obviously. And sort of the negative effect of this war will be felt in both societies for a very long time, probably 15, 20 years. This is not going to be, I would say, flip a switch, we forgot, and we move on, and so on. This will be, no matter how it all ends, this will leave a scar in everyone's sort of life, head, everywhere, in everyone's sort of view of the world, and so on. Now let's move to actually Ukraine, and in terms of the update on the power grid system, it's still alive. It's in pretty terrible shape, but still surviving. Ukraine is trying to import electricity from Europe, as I said before. There are bottlenecks, so basically constraints, because there's a lot of damage to substations, power lines, and so on. So it cannot really import what it needs. So you have the situation where there's acute shortages of electricity in Ukraine, and people tend to have electricity for, let's say, 2 hours and not have it for like 8 hours or 6 hours at best, sometimes 10, 12 hours. So basically the situation is pretty bad for the past I would say months, I guess, maybe even more, a little bit more, since I think end of December. People surviving by using power generators, uh, but the problem is that they are super expensive, as you can imagine. Running it on gasoline or even diesel fuel, it will cost you a fortune pretty quickly. So many people simply cannot afford it, and uh, that's where the problem for from sort of perspective of the society. Now let's do a walk through the front line in a clockwise fashion, as I always do, starting from the north and then moving down south and a little bit west. So the situation along the state border is more or less the same. No essential differences. Some exchanges of the artillery fire, but essentially there's no risk of renewed Russian attack out of this direction. Let's put it this way at this moment. Um, but as everybody picked up at this point, Russia is preparing for some kind of offensive, and where it's going to happen is uh, we'll find out soon, because there are many sort of options, and what comes into the Russian command head, nobody knows. Uh, Now let's jump to the North Luhansk front line. Things here are firmly in the Russian hands in terms of initiative, and they hammering in the same place as this road towards Kupiansk. Then they trying to eliminate this bridgehead, basically that protects Liman and threatens Crimea. So that's a focus of Russian troops right now here. So far, the front line holds more or less. There are some reports that Russian troops managed to advance in the forest, but there's no way to verify like where they are, what the advances is. So I'm just gonna say on the face value, and more likely than not, that's probably um, not true news. Let's put it this way. Now let's move to North Donbass front line, where things are pretty bad for Ukrainian side. Things have not changed since February 2, when I last reported. Well, have not changed in sort of meaningful way. So as you can see, after capture of Blagodatne, Wagner mercenaries are attacking towards Zalizniansk. And as you can imagine, that's to outflank Bakhmut even sort of in more decisive way. But there's also, we'll look into this, there's also Den here, which is pretty dangerous. So let's actually look at this. So as you can see, this is a close map at the Bakhmut, just to kind of give, because this large one is too high level, doesn't kind of provide the whole idea. So what happened is that Russian troops managed to establish bridgehead on this river Bakhmutka. This is a river that essentially splits Bakhmut into two pieces. The main part in the center and the core of the city is on the western bank of Bakhmutka, and some of the industrial facilities here on the eastern, and basically some kind of like the former industrial villages for those plants, basically on the eastern side. So the core, as I said, is on the western side, but doesn't matter at this point. Uh, this is just for educational purposes. So the point is that Russian troops managed to get the bridgehead here with a clear idea of probably attacking towards Berkhivka, as you can see here. And this is Ivanivsky. This is where, from the south, Russian troops basically 1 kilometer from this Ivanivsky. So essentially, like very close. So this is the main road that used to be used to supply Ukrainian troops in the Bakhmut, but it's essentially not usable for a while. I don't know, for like 10 days or so, because it's under artillery control by the Russian troops, right? So this road is out of sort of question. This one, obviously, as you can imagine, as well. This one as well. So the only one that still works is this road that goes here. See Canal, then Kromova, and then Union Bakhmut. Essentially, this is really a last remaining lifeline to support Ukrainian troops in Bakhmut. So, and the danger is that obviously, Russian troops don't need to get here. All they need to get is essentially start controlling Yahidne and Berkhivka, or either of those, or just even simply come somewhere closer uh, where they can establish fire control over this road. And at that point, it's just a question of time. You're basically cutting oxygen to Ukrainian troops here, and the withdrawal will happen sort of in a natural way. For that reason, as you can see, Russian troops are still sort of not terribly pushing Ukrainian troops here on the eastern bank. You see, there is still control of some portion of the town here because it's very clear to the Russian command, and by Russian command I mean Wagner mercenaries command. Is the point is they need to outflank the town to basically to capture it, and the point is about killing soldiers, killing people is not about really capturing territory, which is extremely correct uh, goal because it's all about people. As I said, people are the most valuable resources, not the equipment. And that's what really Ukrainian command, not that they don't recognize, they just too incompetent, lack intelligence to really change that situation. The same Ukrainian political leadership, which is still being rocked by those corruption scandals, but it's more that those corruption scandals are really actually, how would say, artificially generated to basically uh, mm, to find the scapegoats. But the people who really, continue in corruption are still in the power, and there's no change there. So essentially, everything continues as is. So, anyway, so the situation here, as you can see on a sort of micro level, is definitely getting worse. Just question of time before they get here, let's say to this road between Berkhivka and Yahidne, and then it's going to be essentially the days are going to be numbered for the control of Bakhmut. And in my opinion, obviously those days are numbered anyways, unless there is some miracle happens or something. Essentially, um, this is just a question of time, how quickly it will fall. Um, and also want to mention that this again gives more power to former leader. I don't know who's real leader of Wagner mercenaries, but sort of their like former leader, the media person who is Evgeny Prigozhin, to claim more power, more resources towards himself, this organization, and potentially become next Russian president. If, let's say, current one goes away for some reason, one way or another, that's going to be a potential replacement. At least he probably will have quite a bit of sort of support. Um, in in many ways, he's much more dangerous than the current president. Much more dangerous. And when when people say, oh, well, let's remove current, there was, I hear, oh, this is about only Russian president that went crazy and so on. No, it's not. It's a whole system. The whole country is, I would say, went crazy, and it's not. You're not going to change it by removing a particular person. It's a system. It's in a way similar to how Germany was during World War II, and then the process of denazification, where you really need to change the system. And that's in a way what's going on in Russia, and that's what needs to be done. Except Russia is huge, and nobody knows what to do about that. That's really the problem. But now let's just look what's going on a little bit south. So as I said, Wagner mercenaries approached very close to Ivanivsk, 1 kilometer from it. So it's essentially where this arrow is. So the probably front line is somewhere there. There's no way to clearly establish where it is. But in any case, this is sort of not surprising. The advance continues, and the slow grind of Ukrainian resources and most important valuable human resources continues, which, as I said, at some point will, if this continues, will lead to basically avalanche type of crash on the front line. Because once you don't have enough of the people who really create a backbone of the army, then the rest is just falls apart. Okay, let's move. Let's look what's going on central Donbass front line. Was quiet on the 6th. Wasn't quiet before, but as you can see, the tendency is that Russian side essentially stopped attacks here, and probably the reason for that is that they pulling resources from here for whatever they're going to be the place where they're going to make this decisive offensive. We're not sure where. Maybe it will even be here. So unclear, but they clearly their sort of actions clearly indicate that they gather accumulating resources somewhere. We'll find out once that attack starts, but there is clear accumulation of resources happening. Then let's look at Zaporizhya front lines. Things are also the same. No changes after those initial probing attacks. So again, those attacks that were there, and like looking right now back at all of that, was as I said, were probing attacks, probably in order to determine where the path of least resistance is in Ukrainian defenses, where to hit with this offensive that's sort of coming up. So not sure what the Russian command determines. Could be anywhere. One thing I would say is probably not going to happen in North Donbass because, as I said before, there's let's say not open fight, but essentially like total hatred between Wagner mercenaries, or basically Prigozhin and his organization, and regular Russian military. So he probably will not let Russian military attack there. He will say, well, I'm successfully attacking. Please, move out. Don't meddle here. So the attack, and because of this attack is probably going to be done by the regular Russian, not probably, but by the regular Russian troops. So it will be somewhere outside of the North Donbass front line. But in any way, situation there is already difficult and critical. So attacking in other location will only make the whole situation even more difficult and critical for Ukrainian command. But at the same time, the saving grace is that regular Russian military is quite incapable, quite incompetent, and so the chances of success are not big, but they also not zero. Hard to really say, and really depends on the amount of resources that Russian side will amass for that, and also other sort of tactical decisions that they will make in the process of it. So it's really hard to predict, but it's coming up somewhere. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.